want to express my thanks to the authorities of the Association of Transfusional Medicine for the invitation to participate as a speaker in this webinar, and in particular to Dr. Claudio Dufour for his patience and confidence. Thank you, Claudio. As corresponding, I present my declaration of not possessing conflicts of interest that may affect this exhibition, and of course, all the material is available with the sole requirement of citing the source when it corresponds, because their rights are reserved to their rights. I propose you a brief agenda to address. In the first place, some concepts and approaches that every quality management system requires, and in particular in the field of health to practically simultaneously, to address the frameworks and their reference frameworks in the end of reference. Topic of the standards to just understand the complexity of the topic. The next. When we talk about quality management, we usually hear or even appropriate terms such as quality management system, product quality, customer satisfaction, today's stakeholders, risk management, etc. But let each of us think that we should place the quality system at the center of the system. It is not a minor challenge, because the centrality will depend on innumerable factors: the context of our service, the context of our patients, the context of our health reality, and we can continue to identify variables that make the procedure complex. The next. So, we must agree that quality management, in whatever field, but particularly in ours, that of cell therapy, transplantation, involves numerous actors and stages. There are no two identical patients, even if they carry the same pathology label, just as there are no two identical services, no identical donors, or identical human talent. The next. By way of example, when we, in a standard and in particular in our quality system, we focus on stakeholders, IT implies thinking of patients and family members, medical teams, and their specialties, all joining the unique objective team's health with the rest of the support and assistance professionals, the manufacturers, and suppliers, and the members who belong to or perform in the regulatory bodies or the legal controller. The next, please. To diminuate the concept and achieve a correct approach to quality management, IT is required to think about the long way of the cellular transfusion process, and this involves focusing on obtaining the cellular product. The studies of the components and the state of the health and distribution of the product with destination to a patient who requires a precise indication and an effective and safe administration. The next. For those who started in quality management a few years ago, we knew that, when training human talent, Because if they could not write it, then they didn't know what they were doing or they were doing it incorrectly. Today, to this prerequisite is added one that is not minor and is to try to answer the question why to do it. All the tandem of ISO 9000 standards and all the standards that preserve the macro structure of them are focused on the answer to this. The next. The quality system focuses on objective compliance with requirements established by experts and based on the evidence that we call standards or quality criteria. However, those standards require 3 pillars to be sustained. The first definition of the standard is to say statement. The second pillar is the qualification of that standard. IT is a necessary requirement. IT is essential requirement. IT is a recommendation or it is complementary information. And finally, the third pillar must be interpreted. How it is interpreted of that. Today we know that cellular therapy is applied with great success in the treatment of various diseases. The cellular product has great potential in this regard and has very advantaged characteristics, impensed until not a long time ago. However, IT is not a minor data to take into account the requirement of preclinical safety, which attends not only to a high-quality product in its components, but high safety. Therefore, we are not speaking about procedures but about transplant and cellular therapy programs, which must comply with the pre-analytical, analytical, treatment and post-administration requirements. Requirements involving national and international organizations and whose processes are based on the definition, compliance, and evaluation of effectiveness of the different proposed standards. Leadership. From an organizational point of view for quality management processes and their corresponding accreditation are the foundation for accreditation of cellular therapy. Joint Accreditation Committee of the International Society for Cellular Therapy. European Society for the Blood and Bone Transplant. Known by its acronyms, FACT, JC, to which has added the standards for cellular therapies. And finally, the set of ISO 9000 standards related to quality management that incorporated the service as a product. In the link you can access the manual translated by the World Health Organization. The next, please. Some issues to take into account. In these manuals and in particular their standards, they do not attempt to establish a program of good practices since these are generally contemplated in standards of local practices in which the services, both collection, delivery, and treatment are inserted. Added to this are the jurisdictional requirements and regulations of a legal nature and, of course, everything that refers to national regulations. That is why it is only constituted in a recommendation, that we must consider as a minimum requirement to ensure quality management in a cell therapy process, but always subject to those considered that I previously enunciated. So, something interesting, and not least, is that the FACT-JC proposal establishes guidelines for cell processing facilities, as well as clinical transplantation programs, the collection service, selection, processing and conditioning or storage, and that they require a proven experience in the activity. An example of this is that the FACT accreditation is valid for 3 years and the JC for 4 years. After that period, you must restart the process. At the bottom of the web of the organizations, in case they are interested in consulting or requesting information. This is the cover of the Joint Accreditation Manual, available in PDF in version translated by the World Health Organization. In the manual, regulatory aspects are addressed in each chapter to ensure the minimum infrastructure requirement. Human resources, which I prefer to list as human talent. Since people can be there, but another thing is their competence and training. The quality management required and based on the quality policy. The operational procedures at each stage, from the collection of the product and its preparation to its distribution and administration, the equipment, the reagents, the records, the labeling of the cells, the storage, their transport, and the operational safety for all staff and care for the environment. The Achilles heel. As an Achilles heel, we can list that in some cases there is an excess of regulations that complicate accessibility to therapy. There is not always a consensus of experts who address the specific problem that we must attend to in our patient. It is extremely difficult to establish standards based on evidence that is the product of proven evidence, which is why multidisciplinary cooperation is required to continue to attend to a pending issue that is still today morbidity and mortality in its recipients. No less data, and on the end, I will show a graph about it, the scarce number of reports about the quality achieved and its results after the accreditation of a service. We usually publish a lot in research, little in the context review process. Some examples in the manual. B14. For initial accreditation, the clinical program, the director of the clinical program and at least one qualified physician must have a minimum of 12 months prior to applying for accreditation in the program. B152. A combined clinical program serving adult and pediatric patients at the same clinical site must perform at least 5 allogeneic transplants for each type of population. B2. Clinical unit. B21. There should be an inpatient unit that minimizes airborne microbial contamination. And in the B211, the inpatient patient unit must have access to an intensive care unit or equivalent coverage within the institution. B6.1. There should be written criteria for the selection, evaluation, and management of allogeneic and autologous donors written by and directed to appropriately trained medical personnel. If we think about collection services, it is contemplated, for example, in the item C11. These standards apply to the procurement unit in all activities carried out to obtain cell therapy products from living donors. The cell processing units with which the obtaining unit relates must comply with these standards. C12. The procurement unit must comply with all government laws and regulations. C13. For initial accreditation, the obtaining unit, the unit director, the medical director, and at least one employee must have been obtaining cell therapy products for a minimum of 12 months. Why is accreditation important? One of the few existing studies on the projection of quality improvement in patient survival is shown in this graph on a sample of a cohort that involved 107,904 patients between 1999 and 2006, and it is clearly seen that mortality to 10 years, it is significantly reduced in the services that are accredited versus what are not. Fewer patients survive this period in the latter group. The question that colleagues who want to face the challenge of accrediting their services often ask me is, how do we do it? Where do we start? Although it seems obvious, I always urge you to study first. Study what? The answer is simple and straightforward. Study their service. The programs and methods to accredit organizations are procedures carried out by external peers to the organization, with an evaluation modality whose purpose is to verify that the healthcare services are provided according to quality standards, agreed by scientific evidence and good practice regulations. It is a continuous, dynamic process that qualifies the applicant organization with two possible results: yes or no accredited. This external peer review process is periodic, voluntary, confidential, and conducted. Verify prior to request. If there is a quality policy, a process map, staff training program, periodic training, waste control program, supplier evaluation procedure, performance, efficacy, and safety indicators, adherence to biosecurity standards. Infrastructure assessment. Temperature and humidity control records. Environmental and equipment. Action plan for contingencies. risk identification, risk weighting, understanding and empowering terminology, focus on the internal and external customer, leadership and commitment of the management, commitment and competence of human talent, process-based approach, focus on continuous improvement of performance, quality objectives and not purposes or wishes, decision-making based on evidence, cause, effect, management of relationships with all stakeholders, operating procedures manual, standardized records, internal audit program. When we talk about ISO and quality management, we must think of a set or packages of standards that allow us to formally adhere and mature our performance system. This plate shows some essential regulatory documents. Here you can see an example of a process map. It can be used as a matrix to replace by the own aspects of the organization in question. I conclude with this proactive thinking of Lorenzo Snow: be better today than you were yesterday and be better tomorrow than you are today. Thank you very much and let us continue improving.